Howie felt very awkward at first with his cast and his crutches getting in the way, but after a while he found that his clumsy dance had a kind of power in its monotony, and he even began to sing. Not real Indian singing, since he had forgotten all the words, but a kind of made-up song of many vowels that was more like a rhythmic moan. He danced for a long time, for hours, around and around. He lost track of time. He danced until the sky turned gray above the mountains in the east. He danced until the pink dawn made the clouds above San Geronimo Peak catch fire. Around and around the circle he went, on the small patch of desert that he had made his own. At one point he was surprised to see that Allison was standing in her terry-cloth robe near the back fence, watching him, with a look of astonishment on her face. But still he kept dancing. A ghost dancer simply didn't have time to stop and chat with the girls. Howie danced until the morning had fully broken, and then he tripped. He must have been exhausted because he fell hard onto his back, knocking all the wind out of him. He was lucky he hadn't landed on a cactus. As he sat catching his breath, he found he was facing San Geronimo Peak to the east. It was a beautiful sight. The early morning sun was breaking through some dark clouds that were gathering around the peak, allowing a single swath of brilliant sunlight to hit the base of the mountain, shining directly onto the Indian reservation. Howie stared at the focused beam of light as though he had never seen the sun before. As he sat on the desert, Allison approached with a mug of coffee for him. "Allie, I have the craziest idea," he told her. "It's absolutely insane." "I'm glad," she told him. "But next time, can I dance too?" 9. The only way Howie could fit his broken leg into Allison's MG was to stick it out the passenger window as she drove. It was a half-hour drive to the reservation, and they drove in silence. Allison seemed to have complete faith that Howie knew what he was doing, and he didn't want to disillusion her. Frankly, he knew this was nuts. As a final element of absurdity, he had brought along the small hatchet from Allison's downstairs fireplace that she generally used to make kindling. As a weapon, it was a mockery of the handsome woodcutter's long-handled axe. Howie certainly wished he had something more menacing, but unfortunately the police had confiscated the revolver Allison had once kept on her bookshelf behind The Naked and the Dead. What was he doing with a hatchet in his lap and his plaster cast sticking out of Allison's car window? There was at least some small rationalization to this absurdity. It had occurred to Howie that when Josie had kidnapped Angela from Ernie Martinez Municipal Park, she would have needed to take the little girl someplace quiet where they wouldn't be seen or disturbed. What better place to take Angela in order to kill her than the Indian land where Josie had grown up? Certainly there were plenty of other wild places nearby where Josie could have taken the child, hundreds of square miles of wilderness and uninhabited desert. But wouldn't Josie be drawn to her own childhood haunts? She would know endless hiding places on the reservation. Not only that, the state police and FBI would hesitate to enter the sanctuary of Indian land, so she might feel reasonably safe there. This, at least, was the rationalization. Howie knew it was only a guess, not a bad hunch as guesses go, but it could easily lead nowhere. On a more emotional level, he felt that he and Allison would go crazy if they sat around her house another day. It was better to be in motion, to be doing something, anything. And if they found Angela's body, well, that would be devastating, but it would be a sort of closure. Howie believed it better for Allison in the long run to take an active role in this discovery than simply hear about it passively from his lips. Probably it was a good thing Allison didn't ask what they were doing. She just followed Howie's directions and detoured around the touristy part of the Pueblo, then drove along the dirt road toward the mountain valley. As they climbed in altitude, patches of snow appeared and the road became muddy. The last time Howie had come here, he was at the wheel of a four-wheel drive truck. Allison's small sports car was quite a different vehicle, low to the ground and not suited to this kind of terrain. A few times Howie thought they wouldn't get any farther, but Allison managed to race the engine and plow through the mud and standing water as though the car were a speedboat. Clouds were moving quickly across the sun, alternating mountain light and shadow. The air was scented with the fragrant smoke of cedar wood from the houses they passed. The road got worse until finally the MG couldn't go any farther. The wheels spun helplessly as they sank into a snowdrift that crossed the road. But Maria Concha's lonely house was in sight, nestled against the mountains a quarter-mile away. There was no one at Maria's home. No smoke in the chimney, no car in the driveway. No human sound at all, just the wind through the trees. Howie rested on his crutches while Allison watched him, waiting patiently for his next inspired hunch. Unfortunately, Howie at the moment was fresh out of hunches. He was thinking he might have to do a little more dancing just to keep Allison in the right mood when he noticed a horse corral and utility shed that stood at the far side of Maria's garage. There were 2 horses in the corral, a black mare and a smaller palomino, and they were regarding Howie with serious horsey interest, their ears pointed his way. "Do you know how to bridle and saddle a horse?" Howie asked. "I should. I had my own horse when I was a kid, Howie." He was glad to hear just a touch of her old-class arrogance. She was studying him almost as intently as the 2 horses. "Tell me something. Do you actually know what you're doing?" she finally dared to ask. "Not completely," he admitted. "Does it matter?" "I'm not sure. But let's do it anyway." Howie used the blunt end of his hatchet to break the padlock on the utility shed, and Allison found 2 bridles and saddles inside. Allison was looking better today. He watched her as she saddled the horses. There was more color in her face, and the puffiness around her eyes had disappeared. Howie took the larger horse, the black mare, and Allison the palomino. The challenge for Howie now was to get into the saddle. This took a little maneuvering. Allison brought the mare close to the fence and held the bridle. Howie dropped his crutches, reached for the saddle horn, raised his good leg into the stirrup, and swung his cast over at the far side of the horse. "Do you want your crutches?" she asked when he was safely in the saddle. "No, leave them," he told her. "They'd only get in the way." They set off along the trail, following the stream bed into the valley toward the mountains. There was a good deal less snow than when Howie had been here on cross-country skis. Much of the trail was firm. Sometimes they needed to make detours around the deeper drifts. Once, when the snow was impassable, they rode for 15 minutes up the stream itself. As for his cast and broken leg, Howie found it was fairly comfortable to just let it dangle free. Would they discover Angela's fate in this remote valley? Howie was doubtful, but he was glad to be here anyway in the vast peacefulness of nature with Allison riding behind him. They rode for more than an hour into the narrowing canyon without exchanging a single word. And then Howie saw wood smoke from Raymond Concha's adobe hut. The trail passed around a huge boulder, and the hut itself came into view. It was an idyllic setting, a huge cottonwood tree overhead, and the stream gurgling close by. The old Indian was standing outside his front door. He seemed to be expecting them. He held a rifle loosely in his arms. Howie pulled out the hatchet from his belt as he rode closer. The old Indian saw it and smiled faintly. "Hey, where did you get your tomahawk?" he said mockingly. "You must be a real Indian after all." Allison rode up from behind Howie. "Where is my daughter?" she demanded. Raymond frowned, but did not answer. Howie was suddenly very angry. He raised the hatchet above his head. "Hey, old man, I'm going to throw this thing right at your goddamn head if you don't answer the lady's question. Even if I shoot you first, go ahead and try." Howie's bravado was only skin deep, and for a moment he was certain Raymond was going to shoot him. But then the old man let the rifle sag in his arms, and he turned his attention to Allison. "So you've come for your daughter. Why are you looking here?" Howie answered for her. "Where else would she be? This is the only place that makes sense. Perhaps she's dead. Is she?" The old man remained quiet for quite a long time. "This is not a simple matter," he said at last. "Josie brought the child to Maria, my niece, and told her to do the killing. But Maria took pity on the child and couldn't do it. So she lied. She told Josie the girl was dead. Then she brought the girl here and told me that I was the one to do the killing." "And why should you do a thing like that?" "For my people, of course. Josie promised Maria that she would tear up the 99-year lease and return all the Indian land to the reservation. But first this killing must be done." "That doesn't make sense. Why didn't Josie kill the little girl herself?" Raymond shook his head. "This may surprise you, but she couldn't do it either. Actually, it's not so easy to kill in cold blood a small, trusting child and live afterward with your memories. You have to be someone very stern, like me." "So what did you do, Raymond?" Raymond shrugged. "Well, I haven't really killed anyone for a long time, you know. To tell the truth, I've forgotten how. So I thought I'd let the mountain decide. Let her live here for a while and see what the spirits had to say. But it's a funny thing. When I was a young man, the spirits of this land were a lot more decisive than they are today. Maybe they're getting old like I am." Out of the corner of his eye, Howie saw a movement behind the cabin, then a blonde head and a babar sweatshirt. "Mommy, look what I've got!" It was Angela, appearing from the stream bed with a live fish wiggling in her hand. Her clothes were filthy, and it looked as if she hadn't had a bath in days. Allison jumped from her horse and then forced herself to walk calmly to her daughter. She picked Angela up and gave her a fierce hug. "Oh, my Angela, my sweetest angel!" Howie watched from on top of his horse. He was an honest-to-God handsome woodcutter now, and he didn't want to spoil his image by floundering around helplessly on the ground without his crutches. Angela obviously had no idea anything was wrong, or that anyone had been looking for her. She had simply gone off with her Aunt Josie and was now having a wonderful vacation in the mountains with her new friend, Uncle Raymond. "Look, Mommy, I caught a fish. Look what I have." It was only a very small trout, but it looked huge to Angela. It was very much alive in her hand, gasping in the air. "Do you want him for dinner, sweetie?" her mother asked. "No," Angela said thoughtfully, scrunching up her nose. "I want to let him go." "We'd better do that quickly, I think." Allison walked with her daughter down to the stream and watched as Angela set the small trout alongside a slippery rock. "Go away!" the child cried. "Go free!" The little fish hesitated only briefly, and then darted off quickly into the cold current. Epilogue. The Indian Who Lost His Tribe. On an afternoon late in June, Howie drove Allison and Angela to the Albuquerque airport in the old MG, the top down, the wind blowing fiercely in their hair. Howie's plaster cast had been off for nearly a week now, and he was feeling almost alarmingly light and agile. As they drove, Angela fell asleep in her mother's lap. Somewhere in the open stretch of freeway south of Santa Fe, Howie felt Allison's eyes on him through her dark glasses. "I'm going to miss you, Howie." "You'd better write, then," he told her. "I'm expecting at least one letter a week, and lots of postcards of lions and tigers and elephants." "I don't think they have lions and tigers and elephants in Ghana," she told him. "But whatever they have there, you'll get a postcard of it." "Howie, will you write back?" "Of course." "I'm sure going to miss SEX, she said delicately, spelling out the letters in case Angela was not really asleep. "We'll have plenty of that when I come visit you in September," he assured her. "We can SCREW our BRAINS out in a romantic little grass hut. Actually, I'm going to be living in a house. They have them there, you know." "Do they? With roofs, you mean? What about indoor plumbing? We modern Indians don't go anywhere unless there's a jacuzzi." She punched his arm playfully and then fell silent. This moment of separation, now that it was upon them, was difficult and bittersweet. Allison had closed down her Albuquerque clinic and was flying off to Ghana to work in a rural hospital. The AIDS epidemic was bad in Africa, and unlike the people in Albuquerque, Africans were glad to welcome an OB-GYN who was on a mission to promote responsible sex. Howie personally was very much in favor of responsible sex and wished to practice it as frequently as possible. Unfortunately, he had not seen a great deal of Allison over the past few months. At first it was because there were reporters and TV cameras everywhere. Later because Allison wanted a few weeks alone with her daughter, to get to know each other again, she'd said. Then in May, Howie himself became very busy. Wilder and Associates suddenly had more work than they could handle due to the publicity they had received in the media. In his free time, and there wasn't much, Howie was also working with a new spurt of energy on his much-delayed dissertation, Philosophical Divisions at the Top of the Food Chain. As for Allison, her upper-caste hauteur had gradually returned, and even on the nights they spent together, Howie sometimes feared they were drifting apart. She was a very rich woman now, of course. Due to the law that forbade criminals from profiting from their crimes, Allison was in the process of inheriting the entirety of her father's estate, including the San Geronimo ski resort. Howie was happy for her, but it was difficult to be the lover of someone whose economic reality was so enormously different from your own. Small moments, such as settling a bill in a restaurant, became awkward as he insisted on paying, and she insisted that he must not. Actually, Howie was feeling quite wealthy himself, now that Wilder and Associate was a rousing success. But of course, it couldn't compare with Allison's millions. "You'll never guess what Jack told me yesterday," Howie mentioned as they drove. "Luke Doran is setting up a defense fund, helping to raise money for Josie's legal costs." "Is he?" "Luke turns out to be a real Christian after all." Allison sighed and shook her head in amazement. In the past few weeks, Howie and Allison had done their best to avoid speaking of the thing, as they had come to call it, hoping to distance themselves. Now they were both trying out their sea legs, so to speak, seeing if they could talk about it calmly. "I'm supposed to come back for the trial in October, of course, but I'm hoping to get away with sending in a signed deposition," Allison told him. "It's looking now as if the trial will be delayed until February. These things can drag on for years." "You know, I don't feel sorry for Josie. I've tried, but I can't. Not after what she did to Dad, to me, to our dog, Rusty, to Angela. I don't want her to get the death sentence, but I hope she goes to prison for a long, long time." "She will. I gather her lawyers are negotiating a complicated plea bargain where she'll plead guilty to avoid the death penalty. But she'll get life." "Life?" Allison repeated sullenly. "That sure doesn't sound like a life to me. My God, Howie, this has all been such a horrible business. And you know what I still can't understand?" "What's that?" "Why'd she run? I mean, here she had set up this nearly perfect crime to kill Dad and make it look like someone else was to blame. But then she just sort of gave up." "Basically, she had no choice," Howie told her. "The game was up for her. This is something Jack and I discovered only a few days ago. It seems she found the password to your father's computer, so she was able to download his email and read all the messages he had been sending back and forth to Virginia Obrecht, the accountant in Santa Fe, about how Josie had been embezzling from the resort. She broke into your dad's email on the morning before she came to your house. The local internet server here in San Geronimo was cooperative, and we were able to trace the activity on your dad's account. As far as Josie was concerned, this was the last straw. If Virginia knew, there was no way to contain the damage, so she opted to run." "Jack was clever to figure that out." "Jack's a clever guy," he assured her. But Howie, in fact, was being modest. When it came to email, Jack didn't know an inbox from an outbox. He was the wrong generation. It was Howie who had followed the cyber trail, figuring out this particular angle to the case. Success had made him more confident as an investigator, and he was learning to follow his hunches. "Poor Josie," Allison said after a while. "She wasn't very lucky, was she?" "Nope, but once you give yourself up to the ghost dance, it'll destroy a person in the end." Allison smiled. "You did a bit of ghost dancing there yourself, Howie. It didn't destroy you." "Yes, but I was lucky. I tripped." Howie pulled up next to the busy airport curb. They had agreed in advance that he wouldn't park and come inside the terminal. Long goodbyes were too painful. He unloaded her luggage from the back seat and the trunk and set it on the sidewalk. Then he picked up Angela and gave her a big hug. Finally, he turned to Allison. "Well, Allie," he said. "Howie, Howie, my man in the moon, dear." He kissed her just once, lightly on her elegant lips. "I left a little goodbye present for you in the glove compartment," she told him. "You shouldn't have." "No, I should have. You were a surprise in my life, Howard Moon, dear. I wasn't expecting to fall in love." It was nice that she had said the L word at last, but they both knew it was goodbye. She turned abruptly and walked inside the building, with Angela following and a porter pushing a trolley with all her bags. It reminded Howie of the way she had skied away from him so gracefully at the top of the chairlift on April Fool's Day. Gliding away in perfect form. She was good at that. She was even dressed in white today, a rough woven muslin blouse and loose drawstring pants. Howie got back in the car and popped open the glove compartment. Her goodbye present was a pink slip. The ownership of the MG, made out in his name. "Damn you, Allie!" he exploded. He always knew she would leave him like this, an awkward tip pressed discreetly in his hand. He got out of the car to rush after her and give back her damn pink slip. Didn't she know he didn't want anything from her but love? But he stopped at the automatic door when he saw her through the glass. She was giving orders to the porter and moving briskly toward the first-class check-in, her mind already occupied more with what lay ahead in her life than what she had just left behind. So he let her go. He hardly knew her anymore. She was no longer his. Just a wealthy lady in white, her back to him, with her blonde child in tow. Howie returned a second time to the car, his new MG. "One day I'll find my own tribe," he vowed as he turned over the ignition. He knew they were out there somewhere, a whole damn tribe of bookish, misfit Indians. But meanwhile, he felt so suddenly lonely, he could hardly see the road through his tears as he drove away. This concludes Ghost Dancer by Robert Westbrook, narrated by Kaipo Schwab. Copyright 1998 by Robert Westbrook. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Robert Westbrook and was produced in the year 2019 by Tantor Media Incorporated, a division of Recorded Books which holds the copyright thereto. Please visit Tantor.com for more information on our growing library of unabridged audiobooks.